Good morning, class. Today we'll be discussing the transformation between a solid and a liquid. Now, when we're thinking about this transformation, we need to consider Pythagorean's theorem. Pythagorean's theorem is very important as we hypothesize what will be the conclusion. Now, as you're making your conclusion, it's important to consider your sentences that you will draft for your conclusion. It needs to have a subject, a verb, a noun, a preposition, and don't forget the adjectives. Any questions?
Well, hey, welcome to Gathering Point. If you're new here, we've been asking this question for the last several weeks. Anybody have any questions? And I think we all would say, yes, I have so many questions. I have questions about faith, and I have questions about relationships, and I have questions about parenting, and maybe I have questions about life in general. And it can be overwhelming at times. And I would guess that maybe some of us are even there right now, especially in what we've experienced in the last 18 months. When my son Cameron was born about almost 2 years ago, we realized we needed more space in our house. We had a family of 4, we had a 3-bedroom house. The numbers didn't add up, and so we decided our choices were we have to sell our house and buy a house that has 4 bedrooms, or I finish my basement. And so as the pandemic was kind of coming around and we weren't sure what was going to happen with the housing market, we decided, okay, best thing to do, go ahead, let's just finish the basement. We can add an extra bedroom and we'll be fine there. And so I talked to some people who had some experience in remodeling because I didn't have much experience there. And here's what they told me. It's easy. Anybody can do it, right? I mean, it's so easy. We'll tell you everything you need to know. All right, you set my mind at ease. So I set out on this path of learning how to frame walls and use a nail gun, right? And run electrical wire. I mean, all kinds of craziness. And here's what I found out. I found out that easy has a whole lot to do with how much experience and knowledge you have about something, because it wasn't easy for me. I had so many questions. And my friends were probably annoyed with me because I felt like I was calling them or texting them multiple times in a day. And there were several nights where I was just so overwhelmed. I couldn't sleep. I would just stare at the ceiling trying to think about how am I going to get this thing done, and is it going to turn out okay? And with the help of some friends and some patience from them for sure, I was able to complete that project. And I think that it turned out all right. I think about another time that I had questions in my life, but I was a little bit more reluctant to ask for help. Our first child, Emma, was born all the way back in 2002. And I remember, that first time that I held her, and I just remember looking at her and thinking, she's perfect. Look how beautiful she is. And if you're a parent, you probably remember that first moment of holding your child, that miracle of life right there in front of you. And those first few hours after birth, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Because doctors and nurses are coming in and they're checking vital signs and they're making sure that everything is okay. And they're making sure that we have all the information that we need. And they probably could look at my face and tell this guy needs some more help. And they were giving me information just by looking at me. And it was helping put my mind at rest. And then later that day, or maybe it was the next day, it's all kind of a blur. But I remember a nurse coming in and saying, okay, you're free to go. And I remember thinking, huh? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Is there an instruction manual that comes? Like, I still have so many questions. But I don't know that I was comfortable enough asking for help. Maybe I didn't want people to think that I didn't know what I was doing because, I have this responsibility now. And so maybe there's some of you in here that are in the same boat. That when it comes to kids, when it comes to teenagers, we have so many questions. And we might ask a friend how to finish our basement. But to ask a friend how we should parent or what we should do in this situation, I don't want people to think that our family's a mess. I don't want people to think that we don't have it all together or we don't know what we're doing. Now, before any of you tune me out because you don't have kids, or maybe your kids are grown and you're past that stage of life, let me just say, I think that what we're going to talk about today, I think is beneficial for all of us in here. Because I think if you don't have kids, most of us plan on having kids someday. And those of us who maybe our kids are already grown, right? Maybe you have grandkids, or maybe you hope to have grandkids someday. At the very least, you have wisdom and advice to offer. And even if you don't want to have kids, or maybe for some reason you can't have kids, my guess is you probably want to be an awesome aunt or an awesome uncle, right? Or you want to be that person. So I want to ask you to hang with me here for a little bit. There are so many questions that come to our minds when we think about kids and we think about the next generation. But the one I want to focus on today are the questions that we have when it comes to the matters of faith. And I would guess that that matters to most of you. There's something deep down inside of us that says there's something important. There's something that says that I need to pass this information on. I need to help our kids know who God is. And so I want to spend some time this morning thinking about this idea. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home where both my parents were followers of Christ. They were there. They instilled those values in me, and they were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. If they were here today, they would tell you that. But I knew that they were doing their best. I knew that they loved me. Even if we butted heads sometimes and we disagreed, I knew that they loved me. I was also blessed to be around some outstanding adults who helped point me to Jesus because my parents put me in those environments. Sunday school teachers, youth pastors, youth leaders, most of whom I still know their name, and we still talk and text throughout the time because they had an impact on my faith journey. Sometimes I think back to my youth. I think back to those days, and I appreciate them just a little bit more now that I'm older. And sometimes I think, life was a little bit easier. It was a little bit easier then. And it makes me think about my son, who I said, well, he'll turn 2 here in just a couple months. And I think, I wonder what life's going to be like for him as he gets older, right? I mean, how much more is the world going to change? Because I want you to think about it for a minute. I mean, whether it's been 50 years or it's been 5 years, I mean, since you were a teenager, the world looks a whole lot different than it does the last time you were a youth, maybe, right? And I wonder, when I think about that, maybe it's harder today than it ever has been before for our kids and our children to know and love Jesus. Maybe it shouldn't be, right? I mean, technology has promised that things in life will be easier. In some respects, it has been, but it very well may be harder than it's ever been before for our kids to know and love Jesus. I remember when I was a kid, I would hear older people, much older people than I was, they would tell me stories. And maybe you heard stories along this line as well. It would always start like this. When I was a kid, we had to walk to school, uphill, both ways. You know the rest. In the snow, right? I mean, and I always thought, like, how is that even possible? I mean, we live in Ohio, it doesn't snow year round. Or I thought, I sure am glad I didn't live when you were a kid because that sounds awful, right? And then somehow I became that person, right? Because I find myself from time to time saying, when I was a kid, we didn't have the internet. If you wanted to learn something, you had to go to the library and get an encyclopedia. When I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have caller ID. When someone called, you answered the phone and you hoped that it was somebody that you wanted to talk to. When I was a kid, we only had 3 channels. And if Dad wanted the channel changed, guess who the remote was? This guy, right? I mean, that's just what it was, right? And so maybe it was a simpler time. Maybe it was an easier time to follow Jesus because there were less distractions, and we have so many distractions in our lives, and our kids have so much more going on than what we had when we were their age. For example, did you know, I mean, most of us, I would say a most of us have a smartphone. Did you know that on average we touch our smartphones 2,000 times in one day? That's the average. On the high end, it's 5,000 times a day that we pull those things out of our pocket and we're scrolling and swiping and all that. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying like technology's bad and we should go backwards to flip phones and all that stuff, right? But I'm saying that we should be aware. We should be aware of what these things do in our lives, right? In the year 2000, Microsoft did a study. They did a study about humans and technology and all that stuff. And it was before smartphones, obviously. The internet was really in its beginning stages. And Microsoft found that the average attention span of a human being was 12 seconds. 12 seconds, that doesn't seem like a whole lot. But the same study was done here just recently in 2020, 2021, about 20 years later. And they found that the average attention span of a human had dropped from 12 seconds all the way to 8 seconds. And to put that in perspective, they said a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. And so, I'm not sure what that says, but it says something. Children take a lot of time. They take a lot of our attention. God placed children in our lives so that we could take care of them, so we could nurture them, so that we could teach them. And if that doesn't happen, we have a big problem, right? I hope I'm not the only one that this has ever happened to, right? I turn my back for 2 seconds, and there's toilet paper everywhere, and that was a good picture. It's been much worse, trust me. Kids need someone watching over them, or it turns out like that. Jesus said this in Matthew 19. He said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." I think it is important to understand that this passage of Scripture, this story about Jesus' life, was included in 3 of the 4 Gospels. And so 3 of the writers who gave an account of Jesus' life thought that it was really important for us to hear and know this. And maybe it's in there so much because we don't fully get it all the time. We don't fully understand all the time. See, we don't see Jesus get mad very often. When we read the accounts of Jesus' life, we don't see Jesus get angry or upset very often. And there were very few things that would set him off. And this was one of them. And the gospel writer Mark, he gives this account and tells us, backs it up and gives us a backstory. He says, people were bringing their little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. Jesus got angry, right? Jesus got upset. He was mad. Jesus was discussing with the religious leaders a topic that was of great importance. It was talking about divorce and trying to set the religious leaders straight. And while Jesus is having this discussion, people start bringing their children to Jesus. And they're starting to crawl on his lap. And the disciples are like, hey, get the kids out of here. Get the kids out of here, right? Can't you see he's busy? He's talking about important stuff to important people. Get the kids out of here. And at some point, Jesus could take it no more. And he got mad. And he said, don't you dare hinder the children from coming to me. And later on, he would even go on to say that if you hinder one of these children, if you mess up their faith, if you cause them to stumble, it'd be better for you to have a millstone, a rock, tied around your neck and thrown into the sea. And that sounds crazy until you realize how much Jesus cares about children. See, throughout all the Bible, we're commanded to leave a legacy of faith, right? How to train a child up, how to know God's will, how to walk in his ways. And it's the responsibility of all of us, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, somebody who hopes to have kids someday, an aunt or uncle. It's our responsibility as adults who are followers of Christ to help lead that next generation. I want you to listen to what the psalmist says about this. He says, we will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born. And they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. I hear this verse and I think all the way back to 1988. That sounds really like a long time ago when I say it out loud. 1988, I was in 7th grade, in the spring of 7th grade, and I wanted to run on the track team. And I wasn't the fastest kid on the team, but I was fast enough that I could be on the 4x100 relay team. And part of being on that relay team and doing that for the first time was learning how to pass the baton. And sometimes as we were learning how to pass that baton, we would drop the baton and our coach would tell us, hey, it's the passer's responsibility. It's the passer's responsibility to put the baton in a place where the next runner can take it and go as fast as they can. Because we were taught, right? If you've ever run track, right? I got my hand back like this. I see them coming and I'm gonna start moving. And I'm gonna start looking where I'm going. And then it was the passer's responsibility to take that baton and put it in the hand of the person who was receiving it so they could continue to move forward. And the psalmist is saying, don't drop the baton. Don't drop the baton. Because I learned when you drop the baton in a track meet, you lose the race. And this is a race that we can't afford to lose. We have to pass the baton on to the next generation. And so maybe a better question, when we say, I got so many questions about kids and so many questions about teenagers, maybe the better question that we ask is, how do I leave a legacy of faith in my kids' lives? Maybe the question that we're wondering is, how do I pass the baton on well when it comes to our kids? Because here's what I know. Nobody has kids and say, man, I hope I screw this up. Man, I hope my kids are in years of therapy because of things I did or didn't do or things I said or didn't say. Nobody says that, right? We all want to leave a legacy, a lasting legacy of faith in our kids' lives. How do we help lead? How do we help lead them into faith in God? In something that will last long after we're gone, for generations to come. How do we do that? Let's talk about our best chance of getting there. I've noticed my son, who'll be 2 in just a couple months, I've noticed something about him that he watches everything I do. He imitates everything I do. If I make a funny face, he makes a funny face. He thinks it's hilarious. All right, we've got dogs. We've got a French bulldog. His name is Bruce, and we want our dogs to be respectful. So if our dog jumps up on the couch or jumps up on somebody else, Bruce, get down. His name's Bruce. And so now Cameron walks around, Bruce, no, Brucey, no, right? He's imitating the things that we do. Our kids are watching us. It starts out when they're babies. It starts out when they're infants. It continues on when they're 7 and 8, and it continues on even into the teenage years. And sometimes we feel so overwhelmed, and we feel so unqualified to do this. We want to leave a legacy that lasts. But how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we pass the baton on and leave a legacy of faith in our children's lives? Well, the first thing that I think and I believe that we need to do is we have to demonstrate. We have to demonstrate a priority of Jesus and his church in our lives. Because when the baton is being passed, most of the time, if it gets dropped, it's the pastor's fault. They didn't put it where it needed to be. They missed the connection there. And some of you left church at some point in time, but you've come back recently, right? Or maybe you're watching online and you're saying, I'm gonna check it out one more time and see if I'll give it one more shot. But many of you left the church because somebody didn't make it a priority in your life, right? Maybe your parents had talked about church a whole lot, but maybe they only went a handful of times every year. Sunday and Christmas we went, maybe another special occasion here or there. Or maybe they went every week, but you saw it as being, they were just checking off a box because you didn't see evidence of a life changed on Monday through Saturday. I was fortunate enough, again, to grow up in a home where we never missed church, and we went to church a whole lot more back in the 80s and 90s, right? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and many times other nights out of the week. It was a priority in my life, in my parents' life. And yeah, sometimes I didn't want to go. Sometimes I complained to my mom, it's boring. We went to a church, it was only like 60 people, and sometimes I was the only kid there. It's boring, Mom, I don't want to go. Mom, I'm not feeling so well, Mom. I don't think well, you puking? You throwing up? Get in the car, let's go. They didn't waver, right? We're going. I've been in youth ministry for almost 20 years now. I've worked with teenagers for more than that even. And many times I'll have conversations with parents, and sometimes the conversation will go something like this. I don't want to force church on my kids. I don't want to force them to go to church. I don't want to force religion on them. I want them to choose for themselves. The truth is, they're going to choose for themselves. They will. We all do, right? Even though my parents made me go to church, even though when I said I didn't want to go, they still made me go. There came a time where I had to ask the question, do I believe what I believe because I believe it? Or am I just riding mom and dad's coattails? I had to examine everything that I'd ever been taught, everything I'd ever learned about Jesus, everything that people had told me about God. And I had to ask this question, do I believe it? And our kids are going to do it as well. They're going to do it. They're going to make that decision. But just like anything else, it's our responsibility, it's our role as adults to help lead and guide our children. Because God has entrusted them to us. And can we be honest for a minute? If it's important to you, it'll happen, right? If it's important to you, it'll happen. Because we don't let our kids skip school when they come home and go, Mom, school's so boring. The teacher's dumb, she didn't teach me anything, she's mean. You're still going to school, right? Right? When our kids say, I don't want to brush my teeth. We still make our kids brush their teeth because we know what's best for our kids. We know what's best for them, and it's our job to help them get there. There are some things we just don't compromise on. So if we want to leave a legacy, we have to make Jesus a priority. We have to make church a priority in our lives first. But then we also have to make Jesus a priority in our homes. All right, I want you to listen to this passage found in Deuteronomy. It says, fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds. Tie them as symbols on your heads and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors. If you want to leave a legacy that lasts, if you want to leave a legacy of faith, you can't just live it on Sunday mornings, right? Your relationship with Jesus has to spill out into everything you do, every aspect of your life. Because what's demonstrated at home has 100 times more impact than what you demonstrate inside these four walls. I would bet your kids know who your favorite sports teams are. My kids could tell you mine immediately. They know who my favorite baseball team, NFL team, college teams, they could rattle them off just like that. But do they know and do they see our loyalty to Jesus in every aspect of our lives? And I'm not just talking about having a picture hanging on our wall with a fancy scripture that looks really nice. I'm not talking about wearing a Christian t-shirt. I'm not talking about praying before meals on Sunday afternoon or whatever it might look like, right? But do our kids see Jesus spilling out of our lives in everyday life? In how we treat the waitress when we go out to eat? In the things we say to other drivers on the road, even though they can't hear us, guess who hears us? Our 8-year-old sitting in the back seat, right? Do they see Jesus spilling out of our lives in how we love our spouse, in how we behave at their sporting events? Do they see Jesus spilling out? Do you live your life with integrity that they can see? And when we get it wrong, and we all get it wrong, I've gotten it wrong more times than I want to admit. But when we get it wrong, are we quick to admit it? And are we quick to seek forgiveness? And when our kids mess up, and they will mess up, are we quick to show grace to them? Are we quick to forgive and show unconditional love and help them move in the right direction? Do your kids see the same person at home as they see at church? I recently read a study that was done on a specific age group of the millennial generation, and they specifically were asking those who had grown up in church but they had left the church. And they wanted to know, why did you leave the church? Why did you leave the church? And he said, you know, I didn't leave the church because someone forced me to go. That's not why we left. I didn't leave the church because it was boring. That wasn't it. That's not why I left. The number one answer that age group said, that generation said that they had left the church, they said was because I didn't see the message that was being preached and taught on Sunday mornings being lived out, Monday through Saturday. And so what was the point? Is it worth my time? If I'm going to go there and I don't see evidence of a life change, why would I? It isn't good enough for us to just show up on Sunday mornings. It isn't good enough for us just to show up here, right? I mean, if I want to leave a lasting legacy of faith, if I want to leave something with my kids, then I have to demonstrate that Jesus is a priority in every day of my life. Children are keenly aware. They're keenly aware of our behavior, right? So live in such a way that your children see an example of Jesus. Does your talk match your walk? Because they're watching. Right? They're watching when we gossip about people at work. They're watching, they're listening to what we say about people that we don't like very much. They're watching how you treated a referee at their basketball game. And they're probably mimicking us in every aspect. Who you are and how you live your life makes an impact on them, more than you probably realize. But no matter what your story is up to this point, if you're not happy with where it is or the legacy that you are leaving, the great news is it can change. It's not too late, right? I've told this story before, but some of you may not have heard it. My grandfather, my dad's father, was an abusive man. He was married 8 times, 8 different women. All 8 women divorced him. And my grandfather was physically, verbally, emotionally abusive to my father. My dad had to live with his father all throughout. His brothers lived with their mother, but my dad stayed with his dad. And so the abuse was nonstop. And many times when people face traumatic experiences like that, they turn to other things to mask the pain. My dad turned to food. And as a result, he struggled with weight issues his entire life. He had struggled with self-esteem issues. But my dad had an aunt who loved him dearly and was a follower of Christ. And she was praying for him. And she invited him to come to church. And my dad went to church and got involved in that little local church, and he felt a call to become a pastor, and he ended up going to a small little Bible college in central Ohio. And he changed the legacy that was being left for him. He changed the legacy of my life. He broke the chains of destructive behavior. Did it happen all at once? It did not. I mean, my dad struggled with anger because that's what he saw growing up. I mean, I remember hearing my dad destroy a wooden coffee table out of anger. He struggled with self-esteem because of the names that my grandfather would call my dad. But he was not content to stay there. He was not content to be in that place, and he worked hard over the course of his life to change the narrative that was being written. And the man that I remember as a little boy was not the same man that I knew when I became a young adult. He changed. He understood that a legacy could be changed. And he didn't want to leave the same legacy for his family that was being left and laid by generations before him. It can change if you're not happy with the narrative that's being written right now. Hey, if you do the math, you have 936 weeks from the time a child is born until they turn 18, and society says that they can make their own choices and their own decisions, and they don't have to listen to you as a parent anymore. 936 weeks. It sounds like a lot of time. But those of you who have kids that are older know it goes just like that. I mean, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a ton of time. And so what I know is this, that our children may not remember a lot of what we say. And those of us who have teenagers say amen, right? They may not remember a lot of what we say. But they'll remember who we are. They'll remember what we do and how we made them feel. And that goes for all of us. It goes for all of us, right? Whether we have kids, no kids, our kids are grown, it is our responsibility to help pass on a legacy and leave a legacy of faith for the next generation. And we can do that by just simply looking for those opportunities that are around us, right? Opportunities to be a mentor, help a younger parent out simply because you've been there before. You've got wisdom and experience to help those along the way, right? I mean, we can serve in our kids' environments here. We have outstanding kids ministries at GP Kids and Wambaland. And on Sunday night, we have high school ministries. And Wednesday night, we have middle school ministries. And I still remember the names of my youth leaders and my Sunday school teachers by name who would give up their time to be with me on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning or whatever it might look like. If we're in a stage where we have kids of our own, maybe we can just admit, I got questions. I got so many questions. I need to surround myself with people who've been there before. I need to find people who've done it and done it well and ask them if they'll come alongside me, right? And learn from them. And yeah, I get it. All right, we scroll through Instagram, we read Facebook posts, and it looks like we're the only ones who haven't figured it out yet. Right? We're the only ones who haven't figured it out yet. But the truth is this, behind the filters and the perfect pictures are families that are trying to figure it out just like you and me. They're trying to figure it out just like you and me. And so who's got questions? I think we all do. I think we all do, right? We all want to leave a legacy of faith. We all want to leave something that's going to last in the lives of our children. And so as we are called to pass the baton on to that next generation, I want to invite you to be strategic about who your friends are. Be strategic about who you're seeking advice from, who you are spending your time around, who your kids are seeing as an example in their lives as well. If you're a parent, find a community of parents. Find a community of parents that you can meet with regularly, that you can call or text at any moment, and they will be welcoming of that, right? But most importantly, if we want to pass this legacy on, most importantly, make faith a priority in your life. Let your kids see you living it out in how you treat others. Let them see you praying for them and pray for them a lot, right? Let them see it. Let them know you're praying for them. My daughter is a sophomore at Olivet, and every time I drive past Olivet or I'm in town and I can see that smokestack that says ONU, I just pray for my daughter because I know that she's there. I'll text her and say, hey, I'm praying for you today. I want her to know that I'm praying for her. Pray for your kids. Because if we want to leave a lasting legacy of faith, it starts with us. And we have to make sure that we don't just talk about it, that it's not just a Sunday morning thing, but that we're actually living it out. And so let's not be afraid to ask questions. Let's not be afraid to seek advice. And let's not drop the baton as we pass on this legacy of faith to the next generation. Let's pray, and then the band's going to lead us in one more song. Jesus, we come to you today, and we think about kids and teenagers, and it's scary sometimes. It's overwhelming sometimes. It's one of those things where we go, I don't want people to think that I don't have it all figured out. But God, can we just admit that it's all of our responsibilities and that we're all in the same boat together and that you have called us to pass on this legacy of faith to the next generation? And so it's my prayer that each one of us will take that responsibility seriously and that we will not be the ones who drop the baton, but that we will pass it on and we will pass it on well. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you love the content you heard and you'd like to know when the new content becomes available, scroll down and like and subscribe to our channel. Again, thanks so much for being here today, and we can't wait to see you next week.